What if your waking life is also a dream? And what if lucid dreaming held the key to mastering waking life? Blending Neville Goddard's teachings with neuroscience and mystical practice, Shwetha explores why becoming aware is not the same as becoming the author, and why so many of us, even seasoned conscious creators, still feel surprised, stuck, or confused by our reality. You'll learn how dreams mirror your unconscious patterns, why everyone is you pushed out, and how that still applies even when you're shocked by what you see. If you've ever felt like you know the teachings, but still wonder why your outer world does not fully reflect your inner work, this is the conversation that connects the missing dots. To go deeper, join the School of Imagination on Discord. The invite link is in the video description. And if you're ready to train as a reality author and learn the mechanics of the reality simulation through a deep dive into simulation mastery, consider joining our next live cohort of Brave Mystic training, starting soon. Link is in the description. Let's begin this journey into the logic of dreams, the mystery of states, and the power of remembering who is really writing the script. This is DreamLogic.
So, welcome everyone to Friday DreamLogic, where I cover what I like to think of as advanced authorship mechanics, honestly, through lucid dreaming, through exploring lucid dreaming as a practice, as a studied practice and phenomenon, and applying that to our shared waking reality. And it's interesting because now we're in episode 7 from what I've counted so far. And we've covered a lot of ground and I think asked a lot of really solid questions that I think has forwarded my understanding of what it means to become aware and awakened in this shared dream reality. And last week, we were talking about I'm going to say various ideas around what lucid dreamers encounter when they practice this and what kind of scenarios they find themselves in. And I started to sort of map that out to see if there are any parallels to what happens when we start to awaken to who we truly are in this waking reality. And there were a ton of parallels that I started to map out. And today, what I'd like to do is share more of the research that we started to unpack last week. And I want to do that while also sort of making sure we're on the same page that this isn't really about the academic theory and getting like knowing all the latest information. As Neville consistently taught his audiences, we are here to test it. Let's test it out. And the systematic approach we're exploring today honors his understanding that while the law as we know it is an instant experience and timeless, humans need to develop what he called the art of believing, the disciplined capacity to maintain your assumption, and that's despite contrary evidence, which that happens both in dreaming reality and in waking reality. So this testing it out approach is also why I was excited to explore lucid dreaming mechanics and the studies around it because there's an active practice going on and it's like a muscle that they're um, practicing and improving on. And that approach appealed to me as someone that knows that within this waking reality, I can't judge my progress and really anything on just one output, one scene, one set of circumstances. There's no one to change but self. I have to go in recognizing what's the real, who's really real, my I am, and shift accordingly. And then as my state shifts, the external reality automatically shifts. The research from lucid dreaming that I've started to come across just simply confirms what Neville taught about consciousness being primary. Like what's happening in lucid dreaming and even in just regular dreaming, a dream is just your subconscious material expressed outwards. And so I see that Neville's teaching about consciousness being primary is it's very direct in the dream world. And so I've been gleaning additional insights into the mechanics of how awareness operates not just within sleeping reality, but waking reality as well. And as I go through some of the findings that I've been putting together week after week and this past week specifically, if you have any questions or clarification that you'd like me to take a look at, of course, you can use the chat. If you're listening with the replay on YouTube, know that we go live Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Discord. And we'd love to have you live here, helping us make sense of this, asking the right questions, because I, as a researcher, an experimenter, and an explorer of these topics, love to kind of go down various rabbit holes and see what we can learn from different areas of consciousness research and all kinds of spaces. Wizard of Wild says, I was listening to a book on dream yoga today, and I came across an acronym for when people can go directly from the waking state to the dream state. Yes, waking induced lucid dreaming. Wild. Yes. It was already hidden in my username. That's so funny. I love when those little things happen. So I talked last week about mild, which it's called mnemonic. I have a hard time saying that. Induced lucid dreaming called mild, which is essentially setting an intention. So one thing I want to say is don't let some of these terms fool you too much. So many of these terms and the concepts around it are literally like setting intentions, imaginal rehearsals, going into the state akin to sleep, repetition. So many of the principles that are shared in the way that Neville shared conscious creation. So one phenomenon I had kind of promised to explore last week, I think upon Ariel's question, who she's not here live, that's okay, but hopefully she'll hear the replay. False awakenings, on the topic of false awakenings and their waking life parallels. So I see false awakening as your system's most sophisticated defense against genuine transformation. Now, the reason I say that is because the main skill is remembering, a false awakening is kind of perfect because you think that you've awakened and you think you've remembered to the level where you realize that this is a dream. So that's why I call it a sophisticated defense. And practitioners report commonly, like most practitioners who report on this, they commonly describe 3 patterns in false awakenings. And this is there's not a huge amount yet of formal research, but these 3 patterns are starting to become very obvious to those who study this. So type 1 is ordinary false awakenings, where you dream you've woken up and everything just seems normal. So you kind of are like, you wake up literally in your bed, but you're actually you're still sleeping. You wake up in your bed, you wake up, you go to your kitchen, you're doing all the routine, but for some reason it's not like the typical dream logic that people experience where things are just wild and crazy. What actually is happening is you're dreaming that you've woken up and everything is normal. It sort of matches the waking cadence of life. Type 2 is suspicious false awakenings, where people awaken, think they're awakened, but something feels off. The room looks different, people behave strangely, something feels off. And type 3 is what experiencers call super real false awakenings, where everything in their dream reality feels even more vivid and real than their actual waking life. I found it super interesting. So do a little recap. Type 1 is when you wake up and things look normal enough so you actually are still dreaming, but you think you're awake. Type 2 is where it's suspicious false awakenings where you wake up, but something feels off. You're like, this room looks different and people are acting strange. And type 3 is that super real false awakening, to the point where you feel that this in this dream state, which you think you're awake, feels more real. And when participants wake up, they're like, "Oh my god, my dream reality actually felt more real than this waking reality." And I have to say, I've experienced that um, pretty explicitly in my life, where when I'm sleeping and I'm dreaming and I haven't lucid dreamt, but I will awaken and realize, "Oh my god, this dream that I'm like, this waking reality that I'm in feels less potent in a way than what I was dreaming, emotionally, sort of visually, um in terms of like the sense of urgency. There's just something about my dream reality that felt more real or something." So you can see that there's that can be incredibly challenging. Those who are wandering into lucid dreaming, not wandering in, but who are traveling in to the and into the techniques and really embodying them and practicing lucid dreaming, they come across these false awakenings, which I found really interesting as comparisons to what might happen, what might be in store for us, the humans who have started to awaken in our own way in this shared dream. Because in this shared dream that we dream in concert with everyone else, we have some shared mechanics, some shared plot lines, some shared reality that we experience. And so you can imagine that when you awaken and you recognize the dreamlike nature, that there might be some default reactions and some things that essentially you might ruffle up the field, is what I'm trying to get at. Because if it happens even in your solo dream at night, I can kind of see how that dynamic might happen in this waking dream. And what's really interesting is, apparently in lucid dreaming, people typically start with that type 1 dream type, where they wake up in their sleeping reality and think that they've woken up in their waking reality because everything just looks normal and nothing kind of confuses them. Then they move to type 2, the suspicious false awakenings, and then they eventually experience type 3 before achieving stable lucidity. So this is like a common pattern and a progression that seems to happen. So it's almost like levels, at the School of Imagination and within our systems thinking and simulation mastery program and perspective, this idea of like game mechanics, where we live in a multiplayer, multi-layered, multi-level reality. You can kind of see that actually that's explained, like that's displayed, I guess, in lucid dreaming. Like you can kind of see that mapped out in lucid dreaming, that there's levels of false awakenings and levels that people progress through before they can achieve a higher level of lucidity while they're sleeping. I think that's really interesting to consider. And what's really crucial is the most successful lucid dreamers know that if the false awakenings, they don't see them as failures, they see them as training data. Each one builds on our capacity to recognize the difference between a genuine state change and a really convincing simulation. So this attitude that lucid dreamers have about this, I would say something to look at here is that it's not quite as urgent or despairing, or sometimes the stakes aren't quite as high for lucid dreamers when they're experimenting in lucid dreams as it might be for us conscious creators in this shared dream that we come to day after day that has continuity. The stakes feel a lot higher in this waking reality. But I like to be inspired by these other spaces and the sort of detached approach that people have in, for example, in lucid dreaming. That detached approach, I like to kind of borrow from that, okay, in the same way that lucid dreamers they're tracking things, they're tracking their false awakenings, they're not tracking them as failures, but as data. That's something I can apply to my role in this waking reality. When the stakes get really high, it can be really difficult, but that's something that I can apply here. And I have to be honest and say that applying that perspective of that the stakes actually don't matter, because if this is a dream, the stakes are part of the dreamlike structure. And so that's not to say I'm detached, far from it. I love, engaging with the plot line of my story, but there is something to that gives me not just strength but stamina when I'm looking at this world, um so sort of convulsing and reacting to my awakening and lucidity, I take a page out of the Lucid Dreamers book. I'm like, if they go through false awakenings, it's about practice for them. If it's about repetition, if it's about persistence, and that's something that they can then eventually gain and sustain, I can absolutely bring that to my waking reality. So before I go on, I think I felt like that was a lot, but any questions or thoughts on what I've shared? Was that clear? Like the message I was trying to share there around how there's levels of false awakenings in sleeping reality. Lucid dreamers are finding that, and how that might happen in waking reality. And in fact, I've had a chance to sort of explore that a little. What are ways that can impact us in our waking reality? Well, in waking life, this maps onto what I call performative shifts. This has happened to me and so many of the others that I've shared the space with in this community, where you have a breakthrough insight, maybe take some initial action and some inspired action, maybe do an imaginal act, make a decision, just you do something in response to that insight. Then your system creates you can call it like a projection of of it shifts. It starts to shift, but what it's actually doing is your core patterns are still there, but it's almost like a false start. It's like you kind of had an immediate inspiration, shifted a little, but those core patterns were too strong. Those core patterns, because they have such strengthened feedback loops and momentum in your state, your core patterns won over. So it's almost like a false start. So I see that as the type 1 kind of analog of what happens in our waking reality. And type 2, you kind of think, okay, I had that inspiration, I had that moment of lucidity, and that gives you this great idea. Maybe you commit to some creative work. You set up sort of a workspace. You have an inspiration you want to follow, but then something feels off. You're spending more time organizing the supplies, or the inspiration sort of fizzles out, or you start creating something from this like inspired feeling that you had, this lucidity, this moment, but it isn't working, if you know what I mean. There's not that much horsepower to get it off the ground, and it sort of disintegrates. See that as a performative shift, where maybe something feels subtly wrong again, but you can't pinpoint why. Type 3 of a performative shift in this waking reality could be that you have a very intense spiritual experience and breakthrough session, and everything feels really hyper real. Or, I've seen people go into this depersonalization, derealization kind of state. So you have this intense experience, which a lot of people, there's people that do things like transcendental meditation. They sort of jump in after years of not sort of tending to what's within. They might jump into something really deep, like transcendental meditation or Kundalini awakening type practices, where they're going in for hours into a psyche they haven't gotten full awareness of. And so this happens there, where there's this like intense spiritual experience, or like even a breakthrough that can come, and everything feels so significant and hyper real. And this can happen even when you're on like certain types of psychedelics or drugs. But you realize like several months later that nothing fundamentally changed in your daily patterns. So things feel intense as a result of an intense spiritual experience or breakthrough, but nothing fundamentally changed in your life and in your outputs, generally speaking. And so, in a similar way to how lucid dreamers have levels of awakening and false awakening, I see this as some patterns that we might have, where your mind can generate convincing patterns of change, and that actual pattern modification, that actual emergence that we're looking for, where we know that system has changed because your reality has shifted, doesn't necessarily happen. And just like lucid dreamers take that as data, I feel that recognition of that we might fall into this tendency is really helpful towards transforming those tendencies. And I'm curious if anyone else has experienced those types of false awakenings that I was talking about, where you have this, oh my God, like moment where everything feels really significant and you have this awareness and understanding, and yet either the core patterns are still there and nothing has changed, or you start something and it feels like a false start. I'm curious if that's happened before, because you can kind of think of that as probably a natural part of awakening, just like that's a natural part of lucid dreaming. So, oh yeah, so Kathleen said very clear. Thank you. That's awesome. Let me know um, as we go along if you have any questions. Wizard of Wild says that happens to me at least a couple of times a week. And that's real. And guess what? You know what that means? If that happens to you a couple times a week, that means you are practicing this at least a couple times a week, which is, I'm going to tell you more. That's more than a lot of us can say. And that's something to be proud of, because it is, from what I'm paying attention to and from what I'm starting to gather in lucid dreaming, it's really about that persistence. Maybe some people have a natural ability to get lucid, which, by the way, ask your friends if they remember their dreams. Ask your friends if they know they're dreaming when they're dreaming. Lately, because this is a topic I've been talking about for so long, people people are talking to me about their dreams, and the most like the most random people you never expect are like, "Oh yeah, I'm lucid every night. I always know it's a dream every night. I just have to get through it." I'm like, "What? I never knew this about you." So they have this anyway, so my point is they might have a natural inclination to doing something like this, but nothing beats practice and persistency and that self-belief in eventually getting to that. Carrie says, "I had an interesting thing happen to me this morning. I was in a dream and I fell asleep in the dream, and I wanted to wake up, and I ended up yelling in the dream within the dream and also in real life. Josiah had to wake me up." Oh my God. You wanted to wake up, so you started yelling. Do you remember what you were yelling? And okay, so this reminds me of when people sleep talk in general. Sleep talk and sleep walk. But when you're sleep talking, that's not always because you want to wake up. So people sleep talk because for some reason their mouth is moving, because they believe it's so real that they're like, even they were able to get their body to actually move a little. Um, right. Carrie says just normal yelling, no words. I don't know why that kind of is a funny picture in my mind, but hey, it worked. You're yelling, Josiah woke you up, so your intention was strong there. So it's interesting because you wanted to wake up and you end up yelling because you knew that you that would awaken you. That's so interesting. So I had an interesting experience recently where I was doing this intense imaginal act, and this has actually happened before where someone else, my mom, like dreamt of something that I was imagining that happened before. Now the thing that I imagined did not come to fruition. So that there is that. I wanted to bring that up. That one time, like many years ago, I imagined something. My mom imagined, like, had a dream about it that was very aligned, and then I didn't experience it, but I thought that was pretty cool. The other day, my brother told me he had two dreams in like a week span of something that I had been imagining. So I was like, what? Of course, with this new research and the way that I'm looking at DreamLogic, that was even wilder. And I didn't really let on, because one thing I'm experimenting with is not letting on with the dream characters of my waking reality. Kind of like what I was sharing last week about lucid dreamers realizing, and I want to go more into this week, that there's a strategy to engaging with your dream characters. So I've been experimenting with that, where I'm not just, laying all my cards out, which is really my usual style in every interaction. um, but perhaps exploring to see where the dream goes if I don't try to sort of like knock over the table and then knock over the whole house of cards. Carrie says, just I couldn't wake up otherwise. I felt like I was trying. I've had that happen before. Some people who have, I think, sleep paralysis have that experience a lot, where they're not able to wake up at all. I had this experience where I could not open my eyes. I really wanted to, but I couldn't. It's a very uncomfortable experience. Kathleen asks, what about the hidden symbolism? The messages we have to decode. I often dream about lying in bed at night, and then I wake up and there are strangers entering my apartment. Oh, I think I've had that before. Oh my God. And I told them, I live here, you don't. And they say, no, no, we live here too. That's kind of funny. It's not when I'm laughing and I think things are funny, I use more of an interesting laugh. So don't think I'm laughing at your dream. But that is creepy. I think I've certainly had that before. I've had a similar dream where I was lying in bed and I had people coming in and out, but I couldn't open my eyes in this dream. I couldn't see anything. I just had to lie there. I didn't know who was coming into my apartment and going out of my apartment. So I've had that happen. So when you ask about hidden symbolism, I happen to believe, and this is something I want to explore with you because I'm going to share with you a little bit more about like some common symbols in DreamLogic. Um, I believe that this is individual and this is something I experiment with a lot. If I were you, Kathleen, I would go to the end of understanding the symbolism of that dream. Oh, I get it now. I get it now. Like I get that dream now. And in a way that you don't know, you would get your exact like bespoke understanding of what that dream meant for you. That's what I would do because there are definitely commonalities. You could probably GPT this and see and like Google it and see what dream, people who specialize in this might say, but it's I think hyper individualized to your NIOS. Yes. Okay. So, kind of back to false awakenings here. Experienced dreamers use false awakenings as triggers for genuine lucidity through systematic reality testing, because that's what they're doing. They're being systematic with how they want to test their dream reality. And so they use the false awakening as triggers for genuine lucidity. And so the moment that they suspect that they're dreaming, there's these verification protocols. And I've shared about them before, but I'll remind you here. Some of the most reliable tests are to examine your hands, which often appear distorted in dreams. Read, they also recommend to read text twice. So when you're in sleeping reality, in that version of your solo dream, text is very slippery. Text can change very easily. Writing and text frequently changes in dreams. So read text in your dreams, they say, sort of like verification protocols. Then they ask you to look at clocks, digital clocks, regular clocks. Time rarely makes sense in dream logic. And so they give these sort of ways to test reality so that you can start to do them you do them in waking reality enough times, essentially. So you literally, as you're right now, like, look at your hands and see, okay, my hands don't appear distorted. They appear real. And you do that several times throughout the day, that becomes a habit. So they say when you go to sleep, that might be something that you start to do when you sleep. You go look at your hands and then you're like, oh, they look warped. I must be dreaming. So they have these like verification protocols like this. And the crucial detail is it's practice. So they practice these reality checks during waking hours until they become habitual and automatic. And so this idea that practice and habituation helps us awaken was really interesting. So I see the waking equivalent to that as developing automatic authenticity checks for your transformation claims. I think each and every one of us here has examined our current I am state and probably mapped out where our ideal I am state is in the next part of our journey. And so that's the transformation claim that you're making. That's the goal that you're trying to reach. And so 3 reality tests that might help with that and cut through any of those performative shifts I was talking about earlier is to ask yourself, am I doing anything differently? Am I actually doing anything differently? And I say that not because action does anything. We know in DreamLogic, your actions are part of the dream physics experience, and your true projector is our consciousness. But when you are tracking your actions, you can see that that's a result of your state. So one way we can start to awaken is was that a false awakening or was that real? Am I acting differently? The second thing you can kind of ask yourself is, are people responding to me differently? And this, again, the people out there, we can consider them dream characters. I called them NPCs last time, and I think I want to retire that actually, because I think we just call them dream characters. So are the dream characters responding to you differently since you've made that shift and since you're awakening? And another question you can ask is, what other outcomes are shifting? And that can be both internal and external. Am I feeling better? Do I have more self love? Do I have more peace in my heart? And then externally, what does my bank account look like? Are my calendars, you know, updated but also balanced and aligned to what I want to do? Health metrics. And again, not because they have the power, but in the same way that lucid dreamers do reality checks, we can kind of plug in and say, are the outcomes of my state showing my state change? And that doesn't have to happen automatically. Obviously, doesn't happen right away. That's why I teach, simulation mastery and in systems thinking, that there's already a default loop. There's momentum already built, and sometimes shifting states exposes all of that, and you have to persist beyond that. So it's not that it's overnight. That's not the point. But you can tell if if you are in a state of false awakening when you look at some of these reality checks, and that's after consistent practice. And just like lucid dreamers, we would take that as data, not as failure, but as data. And I have to be honest and say that in my 7-8 year journey of practicing Neville Goddard's conscious creation techniques, there were months where it was so stagnant and I was so confused. There were months where everything kind of popped into view. There were weeks where the things that I had been imagining for all came one after the other. And then there was maybe like 8 months where things felt stagnant. And so that practice that we put our focus on, the changing the self, it isn't an automatic shift on the outside. However, if you start to track, okay, well, at least as my internal state shifting, are people starting, maybe my reality hasn't delivered to me the exact output that I'm looking for, but are people treating me differently? Do I command myself with more self-respect? Essentially, I'm asking us to do some authenticity checks the same way lucid dreamers do reality checks. Kathleen asks, like checking in your daily life if your personal reactions are in line to your aim, wish fulfilled. Exactly. That's pretty much it. So all of these reality checks, it's really about actions and reactions, which are essentially betray your state. As Neville would say, your reactions typically betray your state. Carrie says, sometimes I have to laugh at what my brain tries to justify in a dream. One time I was standing in front of a DVD rental box in a dream, and I had the thought that I needed money to rent the DVD. And then the rental box turned into an ATM. So funny. So convenient. My brain just thinks that was really convenient. Not that it's a thing that shouldn't happen. Oh my God, I love that. That's the dream logic at play. And I wonder how much of that applies to our waking reality. Like, how much of the way that we are sort of over relying on our five sense reality, our five senses, how much of that like blinds us? Like, maybe so much of what we experience might be similar to that, and then we fill in the story after. Like, oh, that was convenient. I guess what I'm saying is that that just brings me to this idea that the same way that we fill in the logic, or the logic is just irrelevant, sometimes in our waking reality, as like, how Neville would say, it would have happened anyway. You'll think it would have happened anyway. That's what it feels like to me. Where you don't question it because that's the dream logic. Kathleen says, this reminds me of the quote, judge your day for the seeds you plant instead of the harvest you reap. Yes. And I have to say that this was a hard lesson for me to grasp and want to actually follow, because I was like, well, if I'm planting all the time, then when am I going to get the harvest? Like, I was like very childish about this. And then I went to the end of needing that to be better understood. Like, hey, if I'm just planting things and I don't see anything in my waking reality, like if I don't see anything, then what the hell is the point of all this? I had that very real fear. And I went to the end of like better understanding, okay, like clarifying that. And what I got was the most vivid sort of download, I suppose, of how essentially, and this was actually this ended up being pointed to in a Hindu script. I saw this in a Hindu book, pretty much laid out exactly like how this download came to me, which was that, well, your desire that isn't fulfilled, the seeds that are planted now, unless you truly like unless you receive the promise, which is that you're not on this planet anymore, you're coming back, and guess what, those seeds that you plant in your next life, if you're coming back, are going to be sprouted. So I started thinking, and this is something I played with around with my mom, is like, okay, mom, I know that you're very responsible and you save money and name your assets, you name your beneficiaries, you want legacy in this waking reality, right? What about like if you knew and if you really took this idea seriously, my Hindu mom of reincarnation, if you really took this idea seriously, what could we do so that we could have assets, have a better life, the next life? And what would we do now if we know now conscious states create reality? What would we do now for our future life if we're coming back here? The mechanics do say that. Even Neville has a form of reincarnation that he explores, and it's actually very aligned to Hindu teachings on it. Although the way it shakes out and how he thinks it actually happens is a little different. He says that that wheel of recurrence and reincarnation happens over and over and over until you recognize the truth of who you are and you are brought back to the Father. So yes. And Kathleen says, it would have happened anyway. Yes, every time I manifest a wish fulfilled, I wonder, wouldn't it have happened anyway? And guess what? That's like Carrie saying, that was convenient, and hopping along her merry way to watch that DVD. Probably. That's so funny to me. This is why I want to remember dreams more. Like I've mentioned before that I don't necessarily want to or need to lucid dream because I want to apply that stuff to this waking shared reality more. But what I would like is to remember my dreams more because some of them are just so funny and reveal so much. Okay. So I mentioned this earlier that I've been using NPC in previous discussions, and I was really borrowing from gaming culture and just like how we talk about NPCs in the in common mainstream online culture now, discourse, which is that non-playable characters are essentially computer programs without agency. But I kind of start to feel that that language has this implicit dehumanization. Even though I like, there's a part of me that likes it, but there's another part of me that thinks that there's upgraded language. Neville used the word automatons, but he didn't over rely on that word because automaton starts to sound a little dehumanizing, and I think NPC as well. And it also contradicts our core understanding because there are no programs without real agency, only appears that way from where you're rooted because everyone's rooted within you and you're rooted within everyone else. Because if everyone is you pushed out, as Neville taught, then the people reflecting your consciousness back to you, they're not just mindless automatons. That might be mechanistically a way that we can better understand how powerful our state is. But I think it's better to think of them as expressions of your own awareness. Even in your solo sleeping dreams, the figures that appear have their own apparent autonomy and complexity, interestingly. So even in your solo sleeping dreams, what ends up it's not it won't be obvious to lucid dreamers and you, nor is it feasible to treat them as robots or NPCs. Treating them with autonomy and complexity is actually a tactic or a strategy that lucid dreamers use. So what I want to do is, instead of NPCs, I'm going to call it dream characters. And I think that speaks to the deeper truth that these are conscious projections and not just disposable background figures. So as we're talking about this, I wanted to bring this up because sometimes it can be a dehumanization. So many times I've seen creators like literally take a puppet or something and say, "This is your SP," and they do whatever you say. And you know, I think there's definitely an upgrade to how we talk about certain things like this. So the patterns we're about to explore, so how dream characters respond when you become lucid, apply equally to me when whether you're asleep or awake. And let's talk more about this. So I find this so interesting that sleep researchers have found that dream characters typically fall into predictable categories when confronted with lucidity. And actually, it's really interesting. There's different dream characters that lucid dreaming researchers have found. They have these, for example, there's the neutral bystander, there's the authority figure, there's the seducer or distractor, there's the guide, the trickster, and I want to kind of go in detail of three specific ones uh, today. But just so you know, there's these commonalities of different types of characters that show up apparently in each of our dreams that we can actually start to map that out. And that was really interesting because as I was starting to study these archetypes, so there's like the crowd or the chorus, the absurdist or the trickster. It lined up with what I had read from Carl Jung. So Carl Jung's archetypes, not we're not dream characters, but psychic patterns, and he talked about similar things like the supportive figure. He also talked about the trickster archetype. So there's these shared archetypes that occur both in our waking reality and in our sleeping reality. And when you as a lucid dreamer become lucid and you look at your dream characters, and you start to become lucid, there's three different, I'm going to share with you, three different types that apparently happen when you're in lucid dream world. One is a supportive figure. The supportive figure acknowledges your lucidity and assists with your intentions, like guides or helpers. That's apparently a common archetype in lucid dreaming, that there's this dream character that does not mind that you became lucid. They might even assist with your intentions or guide you in the dream. And lucid dreamers' strategy with these characters and these figures would be to express gratitude and then maintain independent decision making. Because as soon as the supportive figure starts to seem to have more power than you, or you're asking it for more information, you're falling back asleep. But sometimes lucid dreamers find the supportive figure, which is really cool. Then there's the trickster figure, which questions your lucidity through clever arguments. Are you sure you're dreaming? Well, I have dreams too, so I must be real. Are you sure that this is a dream? Because I'm real. And you can kind of see that trickster can be really convincing. And questioning your lucidity through clever arguments could be a really easy way to fall back asleep. And the strategy would be to acknowledge their perspective without being swayed. I hear you, but this is where I'm coming from. And you're not fighting or arguing, you're just neutrally stating your stance. And then there's the hostile figure, which aggressively denies your lucidity and tries to pull you back into unconscious patterns. And these could show up in your dreams as threatening or angry characters. And the strategy there would be to exit, if it starts to get dangerous, set firm boundaries, and try not to emotionally escalate. That emotional endurance being an incredibly important skill throughout this lucid dreaming process. And we can see the waking comparison too. So the supportive figure character in waking life, these are people like us in this group that as we start to awaken, we're celebrating your growth. We're adapting easily to your changes. We play that role of helper or guide because we're acknowledging your lucidity and assisting with your intention to awaken. And even in that case, I mentioned that the dream strategy would be to express gratitude, but maintain your own independent decision making. That's true in this waking reality as well. There might be supportive figures like each of us in this community, and they might help you with your lucidity, acknowledge it, and assist with it, and you still maintain your independent decision making. and not outsource your authority. When it comes to the trickster figure in waking life, there are so many people who might easily undermine our confidence, and they have sophisticated reasoning and all kinds of clever reasons to doubt your awakened perspective and to bring your lucidity to a close. And that could be, honestly, go on YouTube, people who crap all over spirituality, people who are not open to the idea that we are not just flesh bodies, like extreme atheism. So there's certainly that trickster figure. You can think now, they might not, their role in your reality is of a trickster figure because that brings you back to sleeping, but that might not be their intention, but that's just the role that they're playing in your reality. So we would apply the same strategy where we can acknowledge their perspective without being swayed and without arguing, without needing them to be different, where we hear their reasoning and then we maintain our stance. And then the hostile figure that might show up in your waking reality are people who might escalate conflict when you change. You might find yourself in situations where there's hostile characters that don't like the new belief systems that you have and you bring to the table. And in that's can really be difficult, because if they're escalating conflict because you're awakening, what do you do? Well, the strategy that the lucid dreamers use to the hostile figure archetype, we can apply that here, where we focus on setting those firm boundaries and maintain that emotional state endurance, emotional, without escalating, and removing ourselves from the interaction. And nightmare therapy research, there's insights from that show that confronting hostile figures with calm assertiveness often transforms them into a neutral state. And I've noticed that happen, of course, in real life too. And in fact, in all kinds of research about how to de-escalate, staying calm is one of the most top tips, right? Josiah says, "Thank you for bringing the upgraded language. You're welcome. It's something that we're going to continue doing. In our weekly radio sessions, we don't always hash everything out. We bring you fresh ideas, and we want to have connections and bring you connections that might make you think differently. And so it's iterative. And so we might upgrade the language and be careful about our words, because we want to be humanizing. We want to awaken. We don't want to destroy and denigrate. In fact, that brings us back to sleeping." Wizards of Wild says, "I always think of NPCs as closer to AI, so I assume they have autonomous awareness anyway." That is juicy. That's a juicy topic. I have a lot to say about that, or thoughts, a lot to sort of question. I'm very curious about that. So I like your point there. Josiah says, "Neville in the hallway of the hotel. Ladies, this is a dream." Oh yeah, that's such a good one. Oh my God, those ladies were freaked out in their level of reality. Kathleen says, "I love the superhero figures in my dreams." Interesting. I don't think I've ever had a superhero figure in my dream. Could you share more about that? Carrie says, "I had a dream where a gorilla appeared in front of me. I was initially scared, but then remembered that they are me." "The gorilla disappeared and the fountain of youth appeared before me, and I was allowed to drink from it. It was such a clear experience." That's so cool. Can I say though that if there is a gorilla in front of us in waking reality, um, I'm not quite sure if I would what sort of instructions I would give you. I think that's something we would want to look up, and maybe I'll share it next week, what I learned, because yes, they are you, but it's interesting because I want to confirm this, that in this shared mechanics, gorillas can and do, I think, have violent tendencies if we provoke them. So that's not kind of like a strange aside there, but I do want to bring this home, that the shared mechanics in our waking reality, they exist, and their first cause is consciousness, and they exist in as almost like a shared physics, kind of like a play. We all exist, like Shakespeare would say, the world is a play. So we're all different characters in a play, and it's the wildest, craziest play ever. And for it to be coherent, cogent and salient, and for it to make sense as a beginning, middle, and end story, there are shared physics. And that is explicitly a difference between sleep dreaming, lucid dreaming in sleep, and this waking reality. And also, it's a persistent dream. So the stakes are indeed higher. I mean, I think of it like, let's say that I could remember all my sleeping dreams, number one. Even just with that, if I could remember all my sleeping dreams, it would matter so much more to me that I have a good experience. It would matter so much more to me that I master lucid dreaming because I remember it. When I wake up and I don't remember it, I don't feel the need to put that effort to have a better sleeping reality. But if I could remember my sleeping dreams, then those are real experiences, and I would want to make sure that I don't have nightmares every day. You know what I'm getting at? So that's part of the reason. That's the kind of attitude I want to have with this persistent waking reality, where okay, it's persisting. It's gonna happen 80 to 100 years of this dream. I also believe that it's a multi-layered, multi-leveled dream. So if I come back here, those seeds will be sprouted. And I'm basically in this for the long haul. That's what the dream logic applying has really helped me do here. Is really make sense of what it means to awaken, both in lucid dreaming, but applying it to this waking reality. And we're coming up to time here. Sasio says, if anyone is interested, here is the lecture, Neville Goddard lecture, Step into the Picture, Who God Really Is. Yes, I really, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So that's the lecture where, as Josiah was recalling, where Neville was talking about how he entered a dreamlike state so, and told other ladies, I think he was astral projecting, told the ladies that he came across that this is a dream. So I wonder, like, I mean, I need to reread that lecture, so maybe we can bring I will, if everyone wants to do this, actually, everyone who's listening, let's take that as a little takeaway. Not homework, because that sounds boring, but let's do a little takeaway to read that lecture, Step into the Picture. Because next week, what I'll do is start to explore what Neville actually talked about when he talked about dream states. There's so much he talked about that topic that it seems only natural that I start to dive deep into this now that I've covered some of the research that's been done. So this Step into the Picture, Who God Really Is, a 1971 lecture. Let's I encourage and invite all of us to take a read through the story, and we'll talk about it starting next week. Kathleen says, I often dream that I am flying and I really enjoy it. It is a very lucid experience for me. Waking up and having to use my car is very shocking. So it's interesting. I just want to clarify. First, I want to say I love flying dreams. I have a lot of flying dreams. It's so fun. It is so fun. I remember just how fun it is, and it feels so natural. And I really do enjoy those. But it's interesting because you say it's a very lucid experience for me, but then when you wake up and you have to use your car, it's shocking. So what you're saying there is you thought that experience was extremely real. So you actually weren't lucid there, if you know what I'm getting at. We believe in School of Imagination, and this seems to make sense to us, that lucidity is a gradient. So it's not an on or off switch. So you were becoming, what was happening there, and let me know if you agree with this, is that you were experiencing like one of those like types of false awakenings that or one of those types of expansion of your consciousness or expression of your consciousness where you didn't really remember, hey, I'm dreaming now, because you were super immersed in the hyper reality of your dream. Right? So it was a very realistic experience for you. But because you woke up and you're like, oh my God, wait, that was a dream? I don't want to use my car, you know? So I want to be careful. When we say lucid, we mean it's you realizing, hey, this is a dream. That's what we mean. It's the remembering part. Josiah says maybe the better word is realistic versus lucid. And I agree, yes. And dreams can be extremely realistic. Oh, Kathleen says more like disappointment waking up because the dream was so fun. I know what you mean. I've had that happen. I wasn't exactly lucid in my dream, but when I would wake up, I'd be like, oh man, that was just a dream. That would have been so cool. But I have to say, I wonder again, when we wake up from this sleeping dream, would we have this reaction? Oh, that was just a dream. Like, I mean, like the one we all the one we all share, right? Rumi has a beautiful quote about this, that we will wake up from this dream and we wake up laughing and realize that it was a dream. But anyway, we are coming up at time. I want to thank you all for this juicy conversation. If you have any thoughts or questions, or you're wondering about the relevance of this, the point of this, what's the point about this whole premise, let me know. I love doing this week after week. And until next time, I encourage all of us to imagine wisely and continue awakening. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You have just explored another layer of the dream. If it stirred something in you, don't rush to wake up. Let the symbols, the questions, the recognitions keep echoing. To integrate what you're discovering, join the School of Imagination on Discord. You'll find community, prompts, and the live voice stage where these episodes unfold. And if you're ready to go deeper into simulation mastery, state authorship, and the metaphysical training that rewires your reality, Brave Mystic training is now enrolling. Link in the description. Until next time, stay lucid, stay soft, stay sovereign. This is DreamLogic.